Back here on the show, our next topic, our final topic for tonight is one that will make you think. I think so anyway. The reason I think most of us love sports is the passion behind it. And, being a sports fan doesn't necessarily mean you have to be logical at all times. But how often have you watched a game and then, you say out loud or to yourself of the commentators, they're biased. I can't stand so and so. They're such a homer. Maybe on certain occasions that plays, maybe, but more often than not, it's not bias at all. Bias by definition is, quote, a cause or to feel or show prejudice for or against someone or something. And I think sometimes when things aren't going our way or our team's, not playing the way we want them to, we tend to finger point. You get frustrated. You need somebody to take that frustration out on. There is something I will say to be said about the way in which teams are covered, right? You hear of like East Coast bias or West Coast bias, like, and I'm not trying to disparage ESPN, but that is kind of the mothership. Everybody understands what ESPN is. So a lot of people, when they go to highlights or when you watch different programs, there does tend to be a lot of coverage that is, a lot of attention paid to East Coast teams like the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Lakers, right? And maybe you don't get as much national coverage on teams like Detroit or a Cleveland or a Milwaukee, or like in the NBA, like a Portland or a Sacramento. Some of that has to do with how well you're playing, certainly, but there is more of an attention paid, I think, to those, the coastal cities, those marquee markets. So there you can, I can see some of the frustration on that. And you think about the expression like Detroit versus everybody. That works because collectively, we feel we don't get our due respect by being in the Midwest. We don't necessarily garner all the national headlines. So I get that part of it. But what's interesting, and we're going to hear from JC Fox from Mississippi College. He's in the SportsCaster program, and he kind of delves into the difference between what is simple misunderstanding and what is media bias. Here is JC Fox.
When it comes to sports coverage, fans talk about one thing with much consistency: sports media is bias. Recently, I read an article by a sports director from South Dakota named Travis Creans that got me thinking. A lot of fans, including people I often interact with, complain that reporters favor certain teams or storylines. They think journalists are picking favorites or pushing an agenda. That's what people usually mean when they talk about media bias. And it's not just in things such as politics. Sports are a big part of that. But here's the twist. Creans argues that most of the time it isn't bias. It's just a misunderstanding of how sports coverage actually works. He points out that reporters aren't trying to make your favorite team look bad or push their own opinions. They're trying to just tell the story of the game. According to him, there are two key reasons on why sports coverage can feel biased. Number one, audience interest. Reporters choose stories that lots of people will actually read or listen to. Big games, playoff battles, top players. That's what draws attention. That doesn't mean they like those teams more. It just means that's what people care about. His second reason is that media is a business. Newsrooms need readers, listeners, and viewers in order to stay alive. That means they're often going to cover teams and topics that people already follow closely. It's not about favoritism, it's about simple economics. Creans also makes an interesting point saying, quote, journalists aren't fans when they're on the job, end quote. And this is very true. As much as they might love sports, when they're reporting, they must step out of the fan role. If a team wins, the story sounds positive, not because the reporter likes that team, but because that's what happened. Same thing happens if a team loses. That's something fans often miss. When we're passionate about our teams, we want every moment we care about to get attention. But from the media's perspective, it's about who made the biggest impact in the sports world that day. A lot of accusations of sports bias come from not understanding the job media members are actually doing. As fans, we see our own team in their stories through rose colored glasses, and sometimes we forget that media coverage isn't designed for one fan specifically, it's designed for a whole community of fans. If we want more coverage of our team, the best way isn't to blame the media, it's to generate more interest so there's a bigger audience that cares about that specific team. Engagement drives coverage, not favoritism. So, next time someone says that a reporter is biased, maybe pause and ask, are they really biased? Or do we just misunderstand how sports coverage works? I think once we get that, we'll all be better fans.
All right, that was JC Fox from Mississippi College, one of our sportscasters on the program today. We heard from a lot of different voices, and we covered a variety of topics today. So our thanks to Giovanni Macheri for helping to iron out some of the main storylines. Certainly in the Horizon League this year, talking men's basketball. Also Brendan Mato coming on and just talking about sports journalism as a whole and how there's just been that shift into this saturation of opinions versus true sports journalism, right? And then also Andrew Hollinshead from Ann Arbor Pioneer High School talking about Tommy John surgery and the popularity, I guess for lack of a better term, how popular it's become for high school players, in particular pitchers, but that there is a path forward to continue on to play baseball. So we covered a lot of ground this week. Hope you were able to glean, some talking points out of it, some things to think about as you move forward throughout your week. And just a reminder, if you like the program, and we sure hope you do, we come on every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock here on WJR, and you hear from a lot of the younger voices that are aspiring sportscasters that want to work in sports when they graduate, upon graduation, and to work in this field. So a lot of thoughtful young minds, and we hope you learned a little something this week. And we look forward to seeing you again next week, right here on WJR. I'm your host for Open Mic, and until next time, Godspeed.